Okay, I call this Sioux Falls City Council working session to order, and it is Tuesday, March 28th, and in lieu of an informational session, we're going to have a working session, because since the Operations Committee, the current Operations Committee first started, we've been working on revising City Council policies and procedures, and so we are at the point now where we'd like to come forward to the whole council, and I just want to emphasize these are simply proposals in this stage. It's certainly not a done deal. It's not a set document. We're looking for input from you, and that's one of the reasons why we had sent the document out to you last week, so that you would have plenty of time to review it and maybe make notations or highlight sections if you had any questions. And we're going to take the approach where we will spend most of the time in the smaller document that you have before you, which is entitled 2017 City Council Policies and Procedures. And we're going to go through it section by section. And following the review of each section, we will then take any questions or comments before proceeding to the next section. That way we can do it a little bit more effectively, and I think maybe a little more efficiently as well too. But questions are welcome, of course, throughout the process. So I am going to turn it over to our operations manager, Jim David, at this point in time to go through this process that's been undertaken by your operations committee.
Sure. One of the first changes that the committee did approve was actually separating the procedures manual. In the past, it had been simply one book, but the committee determined that they should be divided. You would have the procedures manual that would govern much of the operations of the city council, and then the reference manual, which is more just your matter of fact. It's going to have your ordinances, resolutions, Robert's rules, some narratives, some acronyms, just more matter-of-fact type information. The procedures, and we'll begin on page number 3 in the smaller packet, the procedures manual. That is the first section is the council seating and voting order. This has really been by tradition that the chair determines the seating order. It has been done every 6 months. It has been done every 12 months. But that has been traditionally the decision of the chair. Also by tradition, where I am seated and to the spot next to me on my right is where leadership sits. The next, maybe we'll start there, Councilor Kiley, and then if anybody has any.
You'd like to entertain any questions or comments at this point in time? Any questions or comments on just that segment? I think that's what basically has been done to date, so really no change there. Okay. Thank you, Jim.
Yep, the next item is remote meeting attendance. This is a new item that the Council or Operations Committee had developed. This came after an attempt to do a remote meeting attendance by a couple of council members who were not present, and they just felt that they needed some guidelines for future opportunities to try to bring somebody in remotely. The first, if you look at the very first paragraph there, it says the circumstances that may prevent physical attendance include personal illness, emergency, military service, or geographical distance. They also wanted to put basically some parameters on that if you're going to be not attending a meeting, that you need to contact the city clerk's office. In addition to that, the city council chair to let them know as soon as possible that you will not be attending that meeting. In letter B, it says that all persons present at the place of the meeting, including the members of the public in attendance, can hear and speak to the person, and that the person, vice versa, can also hear and speak and participate in the meeting. In item C, the member participating in the meeting telephonically are in continuous communication with those that are present unless there's some technical difficulties. The intent is that the person that's participating remotely is in continuous conversation, is hearing all the testimony of that meeting. And also that the telephonic connection, it must be made before the start of the meeting. When the roll call is called, that council member that's participating remotely is part of that roll call and acknowledges their attendance at that meeting. It also finally concludes by saying a member who participates telephonically retains his or her right to speak when recognized by the chair, and that they have the ability to make a motion or second a motion, also to cast any votes.
Okay, any questions regarding that section? Councilor Staley.
So if someone is gone because they're on vacation, would they be eligible to participate in that as well remotely?
Yes, they could.
That wasn't one of their.
Councilor Erpenbach.
Well, similar to that, is there a limit to the number of times that someone could phone in? Could I just move to Florida and call in every week?
Technically, you couldn't move to Florida because you'd be somewhat outside your district.
Well, but what if I have
If you
a vacation
retained
place?
your
I'm going to be there
residence in
for.
town?
I'm going to be there for a couple of months. Can I call in every
That would be a good
week?
question. I guess there would be nothing that would prohibit that.
I'm uncomfortable with that. Is what I'm saying to you. I'm being
Yes.
facetious. I'm not comfortable with
I think that
no
would be-
limit.
That
You
would
know, I mean, I can see that perhaps I'm dealing with a chronic illness that is keeping me housebound for those same 2 months, but I would have real concerns about someone wanting even a month away. And again, it's personal. I like to see faces. I want to see body language, and I think that the citizens want that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's a key piece to who we are and what we do. And then I guess I would also ask, who determines if those 4 things have occurred? You know, again, I can say I've got an emergency and I'm going to be gone for a couple of weeks. I mean, and that one's a little more sketchy. It's not as clear to me, but I just wonder if, I mean, we're kind of on the honor system, you know. I'm on vacation. I'm not going to be there next week or whatever, and that's fine. But how do you determine? Because I just feel uncomfortable that it could be gamed, and I'm just throwing it out there again. It's just me just throwing it out there as it could be gamed pretty easily.
Sure. Any other further discussion or comments, Councilor Staley?
Well, in piggybacking on that, what section has the policy for how many meetings you can miss before you're
Right.
Where is that going to be?
That's in the city charter.
So we're not ever going to have that. I think that should maybe be in here too, because that kind of ties in with that I think, you missed 3 of the big meetings, the first meeting of the month, is that correct?
Yeah, it's regular meetings, and regular meetings are defined as the first meeting of the month.
So if you miss 3 of those, then you could be removed from office.
It's at
Right.
the fitness of the council members determined by the full city council. So just because you missed let's say you missed 3 consecutive first regular meetings, it's really at the discretion of the city council.
Okay, so, but that could tie into, so like what Councilor Erpenbach said, if somebody was gone for those meetings, I mean, if you're doing it electronically, then it would be considered like you're still here.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Can I add to that?
Councilor Erickson.
This was done a while ago, actually. It was 2 years ago or something where this started.
Yep.
Just the conversation about it, because I think there was a time where it was really close. We weren't going to have a quorum, and so we thought, oh gosh, can we call in? What can we do to make sure that we can continue this and not interrupt the business and stop whatever rezone, liquor licenses, whatever it is, stop that from happening. And so it was really looked at as that. I mean, there are times where I have missed for family emergencies. I have missed for geographical distances because I was on vacation as well. And we all have lives as well, and that's certainly an option that we can miss from time to time. But it was really viewed as, oh my gosh, we have 3, maybe 4 counselors gone. Do we need to call in? I know at the time another counselor was in another country that was going to call in, but the phone line was kind of sketchy in and out. And so it was really just to protect the ongoing business. And if we plan ahead and let each other know when we're going to be gone, we can avoid some of that as well.
Right. And don't hear me arguing with the committee. I understand how it would work in principle. I'm just, again, and it's not about the folks that are at this table. It never is. It's always about the future. It's always about what could happen if we don't make sure we think of all those extra things. You know, and so for me, the other question is, now it completely went out of my head, so it will come back to me eventually, but it is that idea of, let's just make sure that we're covering all of those bases.
Councilor Selber?
Thank you. Have we had any instances where this is absenteeism has been an issue in recent memory, or there has been?
Yeah, years ago.
I think we attempted an electronic connection, and we didn't have a lot of success on that particular time, as I recall, too.
And that's what brought this
Yes,
policy forward.
because this was a possibility, but we really didn't have any policy describing how it should be done.
But as far as somebody was gone for 3 weeks at a time, or
No, it was just 1 week.
Not.
Well, I
not
thought
during
that was part of
my
this we were talking
time.
about if you were gone
Councilor
for.
Urbanbach would be in better position. In your 7 years, has it been an issue?
It has not in my 7 years. I do know that in the history of the council, it has been an issue.
Right, in the past?
Yes. So of people just checking out, essentially. I do recall my question, if I might, Mr. Chair. In terms of when we had this conversation earlier, it was that idea that, and I'm not sure it's written in there, maybe it is, I'm maybe not reading it right, is that if I'm calling in, it says very clearly I have to be on the phone before the meeting starts. Do I then also have to be there the whole time, or can I, I lost my cell service and check out after that important vote?
It should be addressed in there because we discussed that.
Okay.
You would have to be there the duration of the meeting.
Continuous communication.
Throughout the entire meeting.
Yes, you
Okay.
you cannot
Except
be there
that-
just for one selected.
Except that
agenda.
when I drive under a tunnel and lose cell service,
Lose
then I'm okay, right?
True.
I'm sorry, I'm being
Well,
negative about it,
technology
but I'm
is
just
gonna
very
be
concerned about it.
technology.
Makes me nervous.
Absolutely.
And I know that we've also had negative issues with the telephone before, so I'm just throwing it out there. I'm in favor of it, but just want to be
Well,
careful.
and I think it's also there to assist the individual that has to potentially travel unplanned, like a serious illness in the family or a death in the family, and they still would like to participate in, especially there's important agenda items on the upcoming meeting, and it does afford them that option to do so. So
When my son was in the accident, I was going to be calling in, and then I either just didn't do it, or I don't remember if I ended up being able to make it, but I was out of town for a family emergency, and so I just couldn't do it. But then there were 7 other people here, and I thought, you're all going to be just fine without me.
we could make a notation that we could, the Operations Committee could potentially look at options there, preventing what your first case scenario about it,
Abuse.
you just abusing the
But
system.
maybe it just goes back to the council ethics, you know? I mean, we're good, upstanding people, and I say that about this group. I'm just looking into my crystal ball thinking, who's going to run for this job next time, and what are they going to do, So maybe it goes back to the ethics, that
Yeah,
if I really did get my vacation house in Florida and I'm gone for 6, 8, 10 weeks and I'm always calling in, somebody's going to say, hey, lady, you need to be back here.
Right. And I would think maybe especially if it's the majority of the council disapproves, then that's verse, and I'll restate that, the majority of the council disapproves, they address it, not necessarily just the leadership, but it would be the council as a whole.
We could add some language in there that says that this should be used in rare instances or something like that to give some more guidance on this provision.
Sure.
Just that it shouldn't be abused.
I think that would be a good addition.
Dang, I was going to move to, no.
Any other questions on this particular section? Okay, Jim, you may proceed.
Okay.
I'll actually take the next one here. So changes to council meeting dates and times. As you know, the council meetings are set by ordinance for the first, second, and third Tuesday of each month at 7 p.m. If that day's a holiday, then it's the next succeeding day. What this portion of the procedures and policies manual does is recognize that there may be a need for change. It doesn't dictate specifically when those changes would occur. We're not forecasting particular events throughout the year, but are trying to impart the notion that if you identify a meeting date that may be in conflict with something you believe to be that would be a cause for changing the meeting date, I think really what this is trying to say is it's the intent of the council, well, it does literally say it, it's the intent of the council to identify those potential changes as early as possible, either at an informational meeting or by other means, so that we could take the steps necessary to implement a change. Again, it's not prescribing changes for certain events, which we know may happen on a yearly basis, but just to identify and implement it quicker.
Okay. Any questions? Councilor Staley?
Well, and I would like to see something added to that, because we did run into this when we were going on to the convention, because it wasn't stated anywhere, but we wanted to change the meeting, and we found out we had to have a longer notification period before we were able to do that. And there was some dialogue about when that had been done in the past, and so I think that for future council members moving forward, that would be helpful. Jim, how much time do we need to do? Do you know? I mean, you can't just do that 2 weeks.
So what I would say on that, I mean, that's a lesson learned on my behalf. I think maybe kind of answer your first point, perhaps we should write something in that's, at least for the things that are known, that we do it, like National League of Cities, there's always a staff member that's associated with that. Kind of come up with verbiage to put the onus on that staff member to at least present it to the council well ahead of time. What I've been told is that generally we would like to see, particularly for first and third meetings, that if there's going to be a change, that we do it at least 6 weeks out, because that does influence everything from the signs and the notice requirements for planning and zoning items that you find in the agenda. So I think, and if it's within that 6 weeks, they can still do what they need to do, but as a rule of thumb, I could just kind of add some additional verbiage in here for your future review.
And why did you say first and third, or did you mean first,
because
second, and third?
Generally, yeah, the first and third meetings, because generally, I think for all of them, we would want that lead time. But I bring those up in particular because the first and third meetings generally have those planning and zoning hearing items.
Mm-hmm.
I did, okay.
Okay, any other questions on that particular item? Okay, next item.
So I'll take the next one. This is really no change from any practice that exists right now. It's just more of a memorialization of what's done, and it's meant to be informative for the council as well. It does identify that we're subject to our own agenda deadlines and such, just as the administration is. And it also clearly articulates the same deadlines for things other than city council meetings. Consequently, it's the city council meeting agenda deadlines, which is covered by the executive order, which we've had good success with. But this just also includes those other meetings that aren't covered by the executive order, and just, again, memorializes what we're already doing and provides some visibility on those deadlines and the process.
Okay, very good. Any discussion or questions? Okay, the next item.
The next item is public input. This is really in part a reiteration, again, in part a reiteration of what's in the Code of Ordinances, but it also identifies, particularly in the second paragraph, some actions that have, some precedents and actions that have been taken by the council in the past. Particularly, it just identifies the fact that proponents and opponents during public testimony, that practice is no longer undertaken. Secondly, that the chair reserves the right to limit the number of speakers during any agenda item following 1 hour of testimony, but may be overridden by the council. And also, any member of the council may call on a citizen to provide additional public testimony. Now, the next portion, which you see highlighted in pink, does, again, memorialize and puts into our policy and procedure the procedure for that public laptop that is up there right now. Presently, there's a somewhat dated document on our website it's just on clerk letterhead that just identifies a need to turn items in by 10 a.m. On that in particular, it says only PDF files. What this does is basically keeps that deadline in there, but moves it back to noon. and doesn't distinguish between media types because basically if we could support the media file on there, I suppose it would go on there.
Okay, any questions, comments? Councilor Starr?
Yes. This, only because it came up recently, but my reading of this, and I may want the city attorney to help us a little bit with this wording. I know Councilor Neitzer and I have been discussing this back and forth a little bit. This says that testimony that concerns a resolution or an ordinance's second reading is only allowed during those specific items. To me, that is telling us that giving direction for public input, not public testimony further in the agenda, is the way I read that. And I want to make sure that where that interpretation comes from. Because an alternative interpretation is this says that we don't take public testimony on items other than resolutions and ordinances later in the agenda. And I think there's some confusion as to if that really says that or if it's just addressing public input when it's in that section. So if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, would that be okay if we...
Are you requesting Attorney Fifley address that, or what's your request?
Yeah, that's where I was getting to in a very roundabout way.
Okay, Attorney Fifley?
Thank you, Councilor Starr. Dave Fifley, City Attorney's Office. Briefly, in practice, the way the council and certainly the mayor, who's the chair of the meeting, has interpreted this, as you folks have all seen now through at least several months or several years on the council, is that if an item is up for as a resolution, that is when the public input on that item occurs. As far as a second reading on an ordinance, at the second reading is when that testimony occurs. Otherwise, we have under the city ordinances a general public input part of our agenda. I've always called it the general public input, referring to that it means any topic that is not otherwise on the agenda. And the mayor or the acting mayor, usually the council chair who's running the meeting, will say if it's an item later on the agenda, that's when your public input should take place. Does that make it more clear?
No.
Sorry, we lawyers aren't the best.
No, that's okay, but you did it in less than 1,000 words, so I'm appreciative at least of that part of it. My reading of this is a section that regulates public input. It doesn't regulate testimony and how we handle other things on the agenda, is the way I read what's written here as part of the manual that we're doing.
Okay.
So something pulled from the consent agenda, something other than ordinance or resolution is.
What I would say is this manual augments the city ordinances. So it doesn't necessarily cover everything. It's only meant as a supplement to what's going on. I'd refer you to ordinance section 30.015. Subpart E talks about no person other than the city council and the person having the floor shall be permitted to enter into any discussion, either directly or through a member of the city council without the permission of the mayor or acting mayor. Now, the way Robert's rules runs is that this is, I might need 1,000 words here. Is that okay?
That's not one more, though.
What happens is Robert's rules basically says those who are part of the discussion are the members of the body itself. And public bodies, especially elected officials, have created an exception to that rule under Roberts that says you will allow public input, meaning the public is people that aren't members of the council themselves. What this ordinance is saying is that if there is a discussion going among the council, that it takes a council member to call that person, like I'd like to have Dave Bixler come up and address us, give us some more information on that item. In your consent agenda item that you're referring to, a counselor could pull up someone and ask them to come up and speak on a particular item that's pulled from the consent agenda. Now, anyone who comes up and is addressed that way, notice this ordinance says you still need permission also of the mayor or the acting mayor. So that under Roberts and also the ordinance, you have discretion with the chair to say, Counselor, I don't think we need that. Dave Bixler to come up and explain that further. We all understand it. I believe the issue you had at your last meeting was where you made an appeal to the chair's ruling, made a point of order, and as we've talked about, Counselor Staley, as we've talked about too, is that you have, if the chair, the mayor, the acting mayor, you don't agree with that ruling, you can have a majority of vote of the council to overrule or on appeal that ruling. So for the consent agenda items, we have not had, when something's pulled for further discussion, it means discussion among this group only. And so it would take one of the elected officials to bring someone forward to testify further on it. Is that better?
That's much better. That's getting me there. If I don't, Mr. Chairman, I'd just follow up just a hair here, please. What does state statute require us to do when it concerns public testimony? I'm assuming that with resolutions and ordinances, is there a state requirement, or are we strictly on what the charter and what Robert says in that?
State law does not speak to it other than a land use item. You're to have a public hearing on it. Other than that, state law does not require a public hearing on, well, a few exceptions like your Dow Rummel conduit financing with their bonds. That requires a specific public hearing. But to generalize, it's basically when it's a land use decision, and that is done at the second reading of the ordinance. So that is required, but under state law. But otherwise, for the most part, no other requirements. Under charter, no requirements. So it's all under ordinance as set by you as the city council.
So other than in the case of land use and those exceptions, we could put resolutions and ordinances on the consent agenda.
Then you're I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I jumped in late. If they were non-controversial or something that we want to move along quickly to.
Your chapter 30 of the ordinances requires where resolutions and ordinances are to appear, and that's governed by ordinance on when they are to appear. And those are under the regular agenda.
Perfect. Thank you. Much clearer.
As a general matter, consent agenda items are obviously seen as something that's usually the body knows what it is, you know what's coming. Contracts are obviously the easiest one to know about because they're executing on policy that this body has already established. So it's a matter of, okay, we want this done or this product done. It's approved in our budget. So now it's just a contract executing on that. So that's kind of where contracts usually make sense would appear on the consent.
Councilor Staley?
Well, and I've asked the question this week, being new to this whole process this year, with this consent agenda body of information, because we had a back last summer, they were trying to put the Forward Sioux Falls contract in there that was going to make a 5-year contract. That initially was in there, and then I brought it up and they pulled it out and put it on the regular agenda. And so things are getting put into that, and I've asked the question, what and who determines what goes into the consent agenda? But in keeping with transparency and openness to the public, like last week I brought up that snowcat, the $300,000 expenditure, and I don't think anything's ever set in stone here to say that just because we planned on buying something 5 months ago, we're going to still buy it today. I think things are constantly changing, especially with our revenue shrinking up like we just heard about. So what I was saying last week is a person who I don't even know approached to speak, so I couldn't have called him out by name to give him a chance to speak, but that's how this thing all came about. So first of all, do we have to call the person by name? And secondly is that if we aren't allowed, this consent agenda thing happens at the beginning of the meeting. It's all happening. So if I'm going to pull something like I did last week, maybe I need to start giving my concerns why I'm pulling it at the very beginning, so that somebody in the audience who hears that and says, yeah, that's concerning to me as well, then their only chance to address that is during that 5-minute time, correct? Then they could get up and speak during public input.
Right.
Even though we're taking that and putting it into the regular agenda. correct?
Correct.
So if they don't know that why I think it's a problem and I'm looking at it more closely, if I don't say that initially, then they may not think it's a problem.
In 7 years, my experience has been that if there are concerns by the public on a consent agenda item, they will reach out to you folks ahead of time. Certainly with the agenda going out, proposed agenda going out on Friday afternoon, you folks are contacted if someone in the public has a concern about a consent agenda item. Certainly, in terms of what's put on the consent agenda, that's, we have about 1,000 contracts every year that the city enters into, and those are all governed by the purchasing chapter in the ordinances where it calls all those to go into the consent agenda.
I understand that.
Sure.
But I'm still just saying, just for the sake of pure open government and allowing people to have a chance to weigh in on this, well, and at the end of the day, what happened, the way it played out last week was still correct, right? We had an appeal of, you weren't here for it.
No, I was
but
not.
I believe if you would go back and look at that, I think I've talked with Tom Greco, our expert parliamentarian over there, and he said he thought it went as it should have.
From what I understand, since I was not there personally, but from what I understand, I think the issue is whether, the distinction is whether an individual can be called up by a counselor, a specific individual, versus opening it up to general public input for a consent agenda item. You can call up a specific individual, but I would say it's not correct to call for general public input on a pulled consent agenda item, because that is automatically going directly to a discussion of the council.
And how many individuals can you call up?
There's no limit to that.
But we don't have to call them by name.
Again,
That guy, I had no idea who he was.
well, you could maybe point and say, sir, I understand you would like to talk to it. I'm sorry about that item. I forget your name, but council, I'd like him to come forward and address it. I think that'd be as humanly possible, as good as you can do, then that would be.
And in order for that to happen, we have to still have a point of order, right? That isn't just going to
You can just do it.
You would only have a point, you'd only have a point of order if the chair says, no, we don't want that person coming forward. If a counselor says, I'd like you to come forward, Greg Neitzert, I'd like you to come forward and speak to that item. Counselor Neitzert could, if, assuming he was a private citizen, but the chair could always say, no, we've already heard plenty from Greg Neitzert. We understand what the issues are. I don't want to have that. Then you call for a point of order. Then the chair could say, no, I won't change my ruling, and then you have your majority vote of the council could possibly overrule the chair's ruling.
Further discussion or questions? Okay, next item, please.
All right, the next item is going to be on page number 6. This is the City Council hiring policies. This was brought forward through the Operations Committee after some of the hirings that took place in the Audit Division. However, this hiring policy only governs, does not include the Audit Division. That would be handled by the Audit Charter and by the Audit Committee. But this policy says that the first part deals with the City Council appointed positions. That's the City Clerk, the Operations Manager, and the Budget Analyst. And it says that the committee chair with supervisory oversight. So let's say in Mr. Bixler's position, it would be the Fiscal Committee Chair with supervisory oversight will appoint an ad hoc committee tasked with recommending a candidate or candidates for consideration by the full City Council. And the ad hoc committee will be comprised of councilors from the committee with supervisory oversight. So in that case, it would be the Fiscal Committee, unless they're unable to find a sufficient number to participate. Once the ad hoc committee is constituted, it will coordinate with HR with their hiring efforts. And then once the ad hoc committee does determine a candidate or candidates, the City Council will meet that candidate or candidates in an executive session. And if the ad hoc committee is unable to identify a qualified candidate, the process starts over again. But if there's a consensus after executive session, then that person is brought forward at a regular meeting by motion.
And I'll just finish up there with the last paragraph. And I would actually, after reviewing this with Jim, delete everything after the first sentence. And mostly it's a recognition, currently the assistant city clerks are civil service, but of course they may retire, hopefully in the not very near future. I think we're going to have them around a while, but those positions may be converted to appointed positions, in which case we, depending on whatever decision was made, they would either go through the civil service process or the process that Jim described in the paragraphs above.
Any questions or points of discussion on that particular item? What we were attempting to do is bring consistency to the process here, so that I think, with the exception of really help me out here, which committee, Jim, is our exception? All of a sudden, it's the Audit Committee, because they are governed by their separate charter. We wanted to make sure that it was a similar process, and that the committee chair, not the council chair, but the committee chair would basically be leading that process. Okay, if there aren't any other questions or discussion, let's move on to the next item.
The next item is outside legal services. This was brought forward at the Operations Committee a few months ago, and it was trying to determine how is that money spent that's always been allocated for outside legal services. And so the Operations Committee had tackled this issue, and their recommendation is that it should be used when there's specialization within a certain legal subject, that then the council can request to go outside the city attorney's office for more specialized legal advice. And if that were to take place, that it must be approved by a majority of the councilors at a regular meeting.
Okay. Any discussion? Councilor Staley?
Well, and of course, I was directly involved with this last fall when I was looking for another legal opinion, of which I did spend my own money for that, a second opinion. Met with Attorney Fifley, with the attorney I hired. So I know this money has been in the budget. At that time, I made inquiry into whether we should be opening that up for second opinions for our group, because right now we are just, nothing against our city attorney, but I think he is somewhat aligned to the mayor and his administration. So moving forward, I will always say I think our city council deserves to have their own representation and independent opinions. But let's go to the bottom sentence there. How does that look at a regular city council meeting? What kind of wording would that be? What would that be considered, a resolution or an ordinance?
It would be a motion. In motion.
But we're voting on it,
You're
right?
voting it, correct. Yep. It's just a motion to hire outside legal services. It wouldn't necessarily be a resolution.
And so let's say I would say, I want to do that. Do I have to have two people to get that on the agenda? Let's say I'm going to bring it forth, we're going to vote on it, and as a group, and I'm going to say this is what I'd like.
Yeah, I would refer to the city clerk, but I believe you need an agenda approval form, which requires 2 council members to sign it.
Yeah, the only items that do not require agenda approval forms are reports, like the transfers of appropriations that you see at the end of a meeting, and consent agenda items.
And I would just point out, too, that this is intended to address complex matters which cannot be performed by in-house city attorneys.
Well, and I guess I had talked with the people back, this I think came up several years ago, right? It's been in place since Greg Jameson's time. But what is it, $16,000 we keep in the budget for that?
12,000.
So, okay. So I thought at the time it was maybe put in place so they could get a second opinion on things. But
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. Next item, Jim.
Next item is going to be the city council travel policy. a little bit of history here. This was the only policy that had been approved by City Council resolution in the past. Staff had looked at this along with the Operations Committee and did recommend a few updates to the policy itself. If you look at page number 9, it's recommended that if there is a staff member traveling with a City Council member, that the staff members were the one responsible for the single credit card that is offered to the traveling party. If the staff is not attending with the council member, one would be afforded to the council member while traveling. If you look at page number 10, what's really discussed here is the use of personal vehicles, and there's another section that also addresses this. But the travel policy really tries to emphasize the importance of using a city fleet vehicle rather than a personal vehicle. It says here that if they are reimbursed, if you are using your personal vehicle, you will be reimbursed at the motor pool rate, which is less than the IRS rate. Right now, that's about 40 cents per mile, and that mileage will be based upon Google Maps. There's a uniform standard for determining the miles, and that would be Google Maps, and then also that the mileage for in-city travel would not be covered. So and Mr. Bixler is the one that manages this policy, but he would simply go Sioux Falls to, if you're traveling to Pier, Sioux Falls to Pier on Google Maps and use that. And so if you're driving around back and forth in Pier, that would not be included in your mileage reimbursements. And then if we go to the next page, which would be page number 13, again, this involves the city vehicle. It just again recommends the city fleet vehicle rather than a personal vehicle, and talks about that you would be reimbursed at the motor pool rate. And this also not only impacts council members but also council staff. And I believe that may be the only changes to the travel policy.
Any questions regarding travel policy? Okay, seeing none. Before we move on to the next item, I failed to mention at the beginning that we need to conclude this meeting at 4:45, and so I'm going to get the 5-minute warning at about 4:40. But also, as we'd mentioned in communications that you had received previously, that if we need additional work sessions or it be presented to us in an informational, we can make that determination here, maybe in the final 5 minutes here as we move forward. Okay, go ahead with the next item, please.
Okay, the next item is the Carnegie Townhall Use Policy. This is page 19. This makes some minor changes. One of the key items, basically, I'll just walk you through it. It provides what our capabilities are under guidelines. It talks about priorities for use. There is a reservation form that's required for non-routine meetings. We explain when the meeting rooms are available. Also have provisions in there for coordination with other city staff. We talk about food preparation, etc. Moving on to page 20. Again, sort of the disclaimer that just because a group here doesn't necessarily mean we condone or endorse particularly what they're doing, but we do have some limits. We limit it basically to government organizations and other organizations. The League of Women Voters has their candidate forum in here. We've had members of Congress in here and other meetings along those lines. The City Council certainly reserves the right to determine whether proposed use of the facilities is appropriate. The implied task there, at least for us in the City Council office, is to apprise the council if there is a questionable applicant. We talk about city equipment, and we do identify the fact that the equipment that we're basically all using right now is available for those meetings that are run by the city and codified within our code of ordinances or executive orders. This is to keep other outside organizations from using our equipment, web streaming, etc. primarily because we may not have the capability to do that for what they want, but also because of the impact it may have on resources. And then we just put in there some additional provisions with regard to the physical use of the chamber, putting it back to the way it was once people started using it. There is a provision in here, just so that you know, and I'm sure you may be familiar with it, in terms of reservations. On page 21, we do have a reservation form, but also that paragraph under reservations, just so you know that there is a $150 charge by ordinance if there's a special meeting of the City Council held because of an individual request. And again, that's an ordinance. Otherwise, that's all I have on that particular item.
Any questions or discussion? Councilor Staley?
So, Tom, give me an example of when an individual would have a city council meeting come together.
I couldn't, because I haven't seen one unless somebody here has. It's a provision in our ordinance under fees. It's the use of Carnegie Chambers. It's actually in our council. It's in our council ordinance, and then it's in the fee schedule. But I have.
But like
never seen it happen.
A person can't just ask us to. I mean,
no, somebody could. I suppose if somebody needs it for an emergent reason, we would still have to follow the provisions of ordinance, which requires the mayor or 6 members of the council to call a special meeting. But my presumption is that if it is rooted in an individual request, then that's where the charge would come from. But we have no recent record of it.
Can I ask? Okay.
Yep. Do you have a follow-up?
Well, no, I'm just going to go back to when we were talking about the rescheduling meetings. Is there ever a time when you wouldn't have a meeting? Like on those first 3, would we ever?
One example where we just flat out canceled a meeting, well, examples are election days. So the regular election typically, it has to be the second Tuesday in April. And sometimes, presumably, if there's a runoff election, it may be canceled. Those, of course, could be rescheduled, but this last go-around, it was canceled.
The meeting was canceled?
The council meeting on April 12th this past year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm talking about in the past.
Before my time.
Councilor Erpenbach, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I guess my question is about the same thing that Councilor Staley's talking about, an individual requesting the presence of the council in the chambers. It sounds arcane to me. I think maybe we need an ordinance change that needs to not be an option. I mean, we can't get into that. How could we, with all the legal ramifications of bringing this group together, just seems really odd. And if it stays there, I'm like, when I'm off council, I'm finding $150 and I'm bringing you all together.
Well, again,
it seems weird to me.
They would still presumably need to meet the
right?
mayor's 6 members, but I'll explore that and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, I think we maybe need to change an ordinance. That one seems really odd.
We'd have to have a meeting in order to authorize that, unless it was one of our regular meetings. If it was something that was brought forward well enough in advance that it could be part of a established agenda already. Right. Otherwise, you'd have to have a special meeting to have a special meeting.
I just think that's funny.
Don't know if we want to go down that road. I don't think so. Any other comments on that or questions? What's next on the agenda, Jim or Tom?
If you look at the reference guide, which is the thick book, this is going to be more your matters of fact. It includes references to ordinances, some educational commentary, such as on the committees, on safety, fire alarms, tornado, new member orientations, and so this is not, the Operations Committee is not requesting that this be approved by resolution, simply because, again, it's not the policy or procedures of the City Council. It's just a reference guide for members of the council and its staff.
Okay, any recommendations from council for proceeding from this point? I know that we have a few action items that were identified here today. Councilor Staley. Just
a question, coming back to that thing about prioritizing those 3 meetings. where is that written? Is that in this thing?
You mean the regular city council meetings?
Yes.
Which is, it's in city charter.
Could we get that? I mean, I just think for,
It's in this, it's in the big book.
It's in the big one.
it says about
The charter is in there.
It's in the charter.
Okay, and then it's going to have the, saying that if you miss 3 of the first meetings, that those are the ones where you're, so really technically, someone could miss all the meetings except those first meetings, and they would still be in good standing with the council. So if you just came to the first meeting of the month, that's really all that's required, which to me seems a little.
It's frequently discussed at the Charter Revision Commission, but they have never, as far as I'm aware of, they've never recommended a change to that language.
So they're the ones who would have to.
No, we as a council can bring changes to the charter as well.
But don't we have to vote on those then?
Yeah.
I mean, the
Oh, yeah.
community
Forward.
votes on it.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it is a pretty liberal policy as it is written.
Yeah, it's actually in, it looks like in 2.06, 2.065 C5 fails to attend 50% of the regular monthly meetings of the council during a fiscal year or 3 consecutive regular monthly meetings of the council without being excused by the council. And then somewhere else in the charter, it defines what a regular meeting is.
On page 48.
So it does at least address
page
the
48,
other
I'm sorry.
meetings other than the regular. So cannot fail to attend 50% of the regular monthly meetings, but then it is 3. I thought I remembered 3 consecutive regular, so it's liberal has become even more liberal now. You could miss 2 in a row, attend, and then you could miss 2 more, attend. And as long as you don't exceed that 50% of the regular meetings, you're still in good standing.
And then you could miss all those, because to me, we've been doing 3 meetings with the, and then that informational, every week is full of meetings. So if council members started just only coming to one of those, that would be problematic, I think.
Like if you only came to the 7 o'clock versus
Yes, I
informational.
think that could be problematic.
Councilor Erpenbach.
I guess I would just remind my colleagues that we have had some previous colleagues who have been quite ill, and we have been very liberal with that policy.
Yes.
Because this is a collegial, positive, professional relationship, and we have been very cognizant of people's personal needs. And it hasn't been that long ago that we had a member that was doing that exact thing.
Okay, next item, Jim. Anything from there?
That's it. Just really, it's determining how to proceed. Do we need another working session, an informational, or can this just be brought forward with a resolution?
I would say just let's bring it forward. I'm really comfortable with it, and I appreciate the committee. I was going to say that the committee and Jim's work. I know Jim works really hard on this. I appreciate that it's as clearly put together as it is. It's formatted very well. It's really evolved since the time that I was involved with it years ago.
And if I could
Go
just
ahead.
comment on that, I mean, I really got to hand it to Tom. He really jazzed this thing up quite a bit and made it look very nice. So I definitely don't give me the credit for that. So we can move it forward if you'd like in a resolution. So if you'd like.
And I would suggest, we did have a few action items here, so I would say tend to those, forward it to everybody on the council for their ability to review, and then if there's any questions or concerns, they can still get back, and then we can work it out that way and then bring it forward. And Tom, thank you for as much as you can jazz up city council policies and procedures. Thank you for the effort, but it might be still lacking a little bit here. The jazz factor isn't quite there yet, but anyway.
Jazz hand. Could we also place it on SIRE from this meeting then? Because I don't think there are major amendments. We haven't released this to the public at all, so it was released to us as a council, but we didn't list it with our working documents on SIRE. We had some available, but.
My practice with, and I'd like to comment on that if I may, my practice with other organizations, until you have had an approved working document, because other changes can take place, and once you release it, and then if there is a change that's been identified in the process and now it's authorized in a different format, that sometimes leads to confusion and sometimes criticism.
I would just suggest, Mr. Chair, I don't disagree with you, but I would just suggest if we're going to put it on SIRE, because I agree with that, let's just put a draft watermark on it so
Oh,
that
yes,
it's very
yes.
clear that
That's
this is a
good. Yeah, I
draft.
think that's a good point.
As of this date.
Good compromise.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, right,
Any-
put the date on it.
Yeah,
I'll post it when I post the minutes.
absolutely. Sounds good. Okay, we do have, so we're done with our discussion topic then, and we're into an open discussion period. Any items for open discussion? Seeing none, we finished 3 minutes ahead of schedule. Good job, council. This meeting is adjourned.